Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I moved into the duplex because it was quiet, and I believed quiet meant nothing could reach me there. My name is Maya Caldwell, and for most of my adult life, I confused vigilance with kindness. I thought paying attention made me good. Thought noticing details, anticipating danger, smoothing situations before they turned sharp, was the same thing as being careful with other people. It was a way of staying ahead of harm, or so I told myself. A way of proving I wasn't naive. The duplex at 614 Maple Grove Lane looked like something I could manage. Beige siding, a narrow shared driveway, a short chain-link fence that suggested boundaries without really enforcing them. The porch light buzzed faintly when it came on, then steadied, casting a cone of pale yellow onto the concrete. Fort Collins in early October had a dry, hollow cold. Sound traveled differently there, sharper, clearer. Footsteps carried. Doors closing 2 houses down sounded like they were happening just outside your own. I noticed that the first night, I noticed everything. On October 3rd, just after 11:40 a.m. p.m., I was rinsing a mug in the kitchen sink when I heard footsteps on gravel outside. They weren't hurried, they weren't heavy, just slow, even pressure, heel to toe. I froze with the water still running, my fingers tight around the handle of the mug, and waited. The footsteps stopped when I stopped moving. I held my breath without realizing it, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. The absence of sound pressed in on me harder than the noise had. Then there were 3 distinct knocks on the front door. Not loud, not apologetic, confident, as if the person knocking expected to be answered. When I opened the door, Robert Henderson stood on the porch, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold, hands visible and relaxed at his sides. He wore a navy windbreaker zipped halfway up and jeans that looked worn but clean. He smelled like Old Spice and fabric softener. A smell that immediately made him feel familiar, harmless, like someone I might already know. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said. His voice was calm, steady. I heard something outside and thought I should check. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten, though I wouldn't admit it to myself until much later. I hadn't said anything yet. I hadn't opened the door long enough for him to hear the sink running, and still, he knew. He gestured vaguely toward the yard. There have been prowlers around here. A couple of women down the street had doors tested last week. Figured you should know. He said it carefully, like he was trying not to frighten me, like he was managing my reaction. I remember feeling grateful before I felt afraid, which is important. Fear didn't arrive on its own. It came attached to concern, to warning, to protection. "I'm Robert," he said, from next door. I introduced myself, stepped back, thanked him for telling me. He nodded once, satisfied, and took a step away from the door. "If you hear anything," he said, "text me. I'm usually up late anyway." After he left, I stood with my hand still on the doorknob, listening to the sound of his footsteps retreat. They faded gradually, evenly, until there was nothing. The house felt too large around me after that, the silence brittle and exposed. That was the first night I slept with the hallway light on. Robert became part of my daily awareness quickly, without ever demanding attention. He waved when I left for work in the mornings, coffee mug in hand, standing on his side of the porch like he belonged there. He asked if I'd made it home okay when I got in late. He mentioned the weather, the way the neighborhood used to be quieter, how the houses had thin walls. When he offered to walk me to my car one evening after dark, he framed it as something he needed, not me. "Makes me feel better," he said, smiling slightly. "Knowing you're safe." I told myself it was neighborly. I told myself I was lucky. The noises started small. A tap at the bedroom window late at night, gravel shifting near the side yard, a faint scrape near the back door that could have been wind or a raccoon. If I tried hard enough to believe that, each time, my body reacted before my thoughts did. Heart rate up, shoulders tight, breath shallow. And always, within a minute or two, my phone would buzz. "Robert, you hear that too?" "Robert, stay inside. I'll check." Noise meant fear. His text meant relief. I didn't think of it as conditioning. I thought of it as reassurance. Sometimes he'd knock and sit with me for a while afterward, boots lined neatly by the door, hands folded loosely in his lap. He talked about his late wife, about how quiet could get loud if you weren't careful. He listened more than he spoke, which I mistook for empathy. He never asked me questions that would force me to explain myself too much. He let me talk just enough to feel understood. One night, he handed me pepper spray, a small pink canister, light in my palm. "Just in case," he said. "You probably won't ever need it, but it helps to feel prepared." I kept it on the nightstand right where I could reach it. I slept better knowing it was there. The weeks blurred into a routine I didn't question. Noise, fear, text, relief. Sometimes Robert stayed longer, sometimes he didn't come at all, and the noises stopped on their own. I noticed that pattern, filed it away without examining it too closely. I noticed other things too, how he always seemed to know exactly when something had happened, how he corrected me gently if I guessed the time wrong. "That was closer to 2, he said once, smiling. "I remember because I checked my phone." I laughed it off. I told myself he was observant. The unease crept in sideways, not as panic, but as a low-level discomfort I couldn't name. How he knew when I was awake, how the yard lights always seemed to go on just before I looked out the window. How the noises never escalated, never forced me to take action beyond texting him. I installed a small camera facing the yard without telling anyone. The decision felt disloyal, like I was accusing someone who had done nothing wrong. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down. At 20:17 a.m., Robert crossed the frame. Hood up, hands in his pockets. He moved slowly without urgency. He tested my door handle once, then again, not aggressively. Just checking. He kicked the gravel near the step, glanced at his watch, and stood there waiting. After exactly 2 minutes, he took out his phone. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. "Robert, I hear it too. Stay inside." There was no tension in him on the screen, no fear. He looked bored. I replayed the clip until the movements felt memorized. Then I went to the sink and sprayed the pepper spray into the basin. Clear liquid splashed against the steel. Water. My stomach dropped hard enough that I had to brace myself against the counter. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, phone in my hand, thoughts eerily calm. The pattern snapped into focus all at once. Noise, fear, text, relief. A reward system. I hadn't been protected. I'd been trained. I typed back, "Me, I'm calling the police, Robert." On the camera feed, his head snapped up. He stared at my door, didn't move, didn't reply. The police arrived quietly. They watched the footage, asked questions, took notes. Robert was taken away without a scene. He looked smaller without his coat, without his calm voice filling the space. Afterward, the house felt wrong, too open, too exposed. I changed the locks, installed brighter lights, deleted his number. But the damage didn't leave with him. The worst part isn't the noise anymore. It's the silence, because I know now that quiet doesn't mean you're alone. It just means they're waiting for you to notice them. I agreed to list him as my emergency contact because he said it was practical. And practicality has always sounded like safety to me. That thought surfaced before memory did, before shape or color, before I knew where my body ended and the room began. Practicality had always felt like something you could hold on to solid, clean-edged, immune to panic. Ethan spoke in practical sentences. He always had. That was why I trusted him. That was why, when the ambulance doors slammed shut behind me with a sound like a vault ceiling, my mind reached for his name instead of my own. The rain was so loud it felt deliberate, each drop hammering metal as if trying to force entry. When my eyes finally opened, the world was reduced to fluorescent glare and a smell that burned the back of my throat. Antiseptic, bleach, plastic tubing, warmed by skin. Underneath it all, something faintly sour, like old flowers abandoned in water stein. Mercy General Hospital breathed around me, machines humming, vents whispering, a rhythm that did not adjust to mine, no matter how shallow or fast my own breaths became. My name is Natalie Price, and the first face I saw was Ethan Blake's, already turned toward a nurse, his body angled just enough to suggest vigilance. He was speaking before I was fully conscious, his voice steady, almost soothing. "She doesn't do well with pain medication," he said. "History of misuse. She's in recovery. No narcotics, please. The word recovery floated through the air like a verdict. I tried to lift my head. The ceiling slid sideways, fractured into panels that refused to line up. My tongue felt thick, rubbery, like it didn't belong to me. That's not. I tried to say. What came out was a soft, unfinished sound. Ethan didn't turn. He smiled at me the way you smile at someone who has proven your point. "Hey," he murmured. Then, to the nurse, "See?" Disoriented. She panics when questioned. "It's better if I explain things." The nurse nodded, a small, efficient motion, barely a second long. That nod was the first cut, clean, quiet. Almost polite. I told myself it was the medication, ironic, given what he'd just said. Sedation bends reality. Exhaustion distorts sequence. I had always trusted my mind, but I also believed in chemistry, in context, in the idea that clarity returns if you wait long enough. I waited. Ethan stayed. He stayed when doctors rounded, positioning himself between me and their questions like a translator I hadn't asked for. He summarized my symptoms with careful language, framing my pain as anxiety, my confusion as baseline. When someone addressed me directly, he answered before I could gather my thoughts, his words arriving smoothly while mine lagged behind, delayed and clumsy. "She hates being overwhelmed," he said. "She asked me to handle decisions. She told me she didn't want family contacted." Each sentence landed before I could contradict it. When I did manage to speak, my voice sounded wrong to my own ears, thin, delayed. Like audio out of sync with video, I would start a sentence, knowing exactly where it was going, only to lose it halfway through. The ending dissolving before it reached my mouth. "No psych consult," Ethan said at one point, his hand resting lightly on my forearm. "That just makes her spiral." I pulled my arm back. The motion felt exaggerated, like moving through water. "I didn't say that," I said. He turned then, concern already arranged on his face. "You did. Last night. You don't remember." I searched my memory. There were gaps, yes, hours missing, but there were also impressions. The rain, the nurse's nod, Ethan's voice filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. It was easier, safer, to believe I had forgotten something than to believe something was being taken. Forms began appearing at my bedside on the second day. Thin stacks clipped neatly, corners aligned with a precision that felt intentional. Consent to share information. Authorization for care coordination, temporary psychiatric evaluation. A transfer agreement, folded so only the signature line showed. "Standard stuff," Ethan said, sliding a pen into my hand. "You don't want to be dealing with paperwork right now." "What's this one?" I asked, tapping the thicker form. He didn't hesitate. "Contingency, in case you get overwhelmed and need a longer recovery setting. Just a safeguard." The word safeguard had always worked on me. It sounded like protection, not confinement. My hand shook as I signed. I told myself I could revoke it later. I told myself this was temporary. The betrayal didn't arrive with shouting or sudden violence. It arrived in documentation. Patient exhibits unreliable recall. Patient demonstrates agitation when challenged. Emergency contact reports history of substance misuse and emotional instability. I heard it first from a resident flipping through my chart. Her tone neutral, almost bored. "Given your history," she said, "we want to be cautious." "What history?" I asked. She glanced down. "Your emergency contact provided it." I asked to see my chart. It took longer than it should have. When it finally arrived, I saw Ethan's name threaded through it like a signature on my life. Observations attributed to him. Phrases I had never said placed in quotation marks. My questions reframed as symptoms. My protests as escalation. I confronted him that afternoon. He was standing by the window, watching rain bead and slide down the glass, his reflection layered over the parking lot below. "You told them I'm an addict," I said. He turned slowly. "I told them the truth. I've never relapsed," he supplied gently. "I know. That's what you told me too." Something cold spread behind my ribs. "I never told you that." He smiled patient. "Natalie, listen to yourself. You're confused." That's exactly what I was trying to explain to them. The hallway outside my room was loud, carts rattling, voices overlapping, a monitor chiming insistently. The world felt suddenly narrow, my body an object being interpreted by strangers who trusted the wrong witness. "I want you removed from my chart," I said. I want to list someone else. His expression softened, almost pitying. You're proving my point. That night, I tried to use the bedside phone. The dial tone never came. I checked the cord, followed it down to where it disappeared behind the bed. It wasn't plugged in. When I bent to reach the outlet, a nurse walked in. Ethan followed her gaze to my hands on the wires. "See," he said quietly. "She's pulling out equipment again." The nurse's mouth tightened, another nod. I stopped sleeping after that, or maybe I slept too much. Time blurred into long stretches of white light and murmured conversations that stopped when I opened my eyes. I began to doubt the order of events. I began to doubt my own reactions. Gaslighting doesn't feel like being lied to. It feels like being corrected. I heard Ethan on the phone early one morning, his voice low, confident. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow. "Yeah, the hold is active," he said. "Doctor signed off. We can list the house next week." There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. She won't remember this conversation either. Something inside me went very still. Fear sharpened into clarity, the way pain sometimes does. This wasn't concern. This wasn't care. This was strategy. My escape wasn't dramatic. It was desperate and clumsy. I whispered to a night shift physician when Ethan stepped out to get coffee, my voice barely louder than the machine's. "Please," I said. Read the dates. He wasn't here when these notes were written. The doctor frowned. He read. He asked questions Ethan hadn't prepared answers for. It still took days. Reviews, calls, a social worker who looked at me like she was trying to see past fog. By the time the psychiatric hold was lifted, my name felt altered, like it had been passed through too many mouths. Ethan never raised his voice. Even when security escorted him out, he looked wounded rather than angry. A man misunderstood. I was discharged with apologies and a stack of paperwork documenting my experience. My voice felt thinner when I spoke, like it had been stretched and never fully returned to its original shape. I don't list an emergency contact anymore, because betrayal doesn't always arrive when you're strong. It waits until you're barely awake, and then it speaks for you. I let her keep the spare key because she said emergencies don't schedule themselves. That sentence still sounds reasonable when I say it out loud. It sounds like something a competent adult would decide while standing in a kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon cleaner, while the late summer light angled through the blinds and made everything look orderly enough to trust. My name is Olivia Kane, and my fear has always been trusting people who speak in contingencies. If this happens, just in case, we might as well. I used to think that made me cautious. Now I understand it only meant I was practiced at handing control to whoever sounded calmest. On September 27th, 5:46 a.m., ash drifted like gray snow over Redwood Crest Apartments, the sky bruised orange by wildfire, the air tasting like burned plastic and pine sap. I woke to the smell before the sound. My throat already raw, my tongue gritty, as if I'd been breathing smoke in my sleep. When the sirens started, they didn't wail so much as stitch the morning together in long, panicked seams. Marisol Vega was already dressed when she knocked on my door. That should have been my first warning. She stood there in jeans and a hoodie, hair braided back neatly, phone in her hand, eyes bright and focused. Calm radiated from her in a way that felt like relief. "Liv, we need to go now." The hallway lights flickered as someone slammed a door 2 units down. The fire alarm began its flat, relentless scream. I remember thinking, absurdly, that Marisol looked like she'd rehearsed this moment. "Is it bad?" I asked, already coughing. She nodded once. "Bad enough that we don't debate it," she said and that mattered to me then. While I pulled on shoes and shoved my laptop into my bag, she narrated decisions in a voice that felt merciful. "I'll handle the insurance calls. You grab essentials, meds, documents, the external drive. I've got the cat carrier. Wait, you don't need to. It's faster if one of us does it," she said, gentle but firm. "And I'm better on the phone when things get bureaucratic." She had always been better at those things. Forms, calls, waiting on hold without sounding like she wanted to scream. I had lived with her for 3 years, long enough to let that difference harden into habit. Outside, the parking lot was chaos, cars idling, people shouting names, ash sticking to sweat, damp skin. The sky was the wrong color, like a photograph that had been overexposed and then burned at the edges. Sirens layered over each other, until direction stopped mattering. Marisol drove. I watched embers drift past the windshield and tried not to imagine them landing somewhere dry and waiting. At the motel 20 miles south, the air smelled like bleach and stale carpet. Smoke hung low even there, turning the sun into a dull coin. We checked in behind a couple arguing softly about whether they'd left the dog's medication behind. The room had 2 beds, identical, and a desk bolted to the wall. Marisol dropped her bag and immediately started dialing. "Insurance first," she said, before the lines clog. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone, which buzzed with emergency alerts and missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let it ring while she talked, her voice shifting into a version of itself I rarely heard. Brisk, competent, threaded with sympathy. "Yes. Total evacuation. Policy number. Yes, I understand. No, she's here with me." At some point, my phone buzzed again. I didn't reach for it fast enough. Marisol glanced over. "Oh, sorry," she said, and answered it. "Hello. This is Olivia." I stood up. "Wait," she covered the receiver. "It's the adjuster. I already started the claim. It's easier if we're consistent." She smiled an apology, and I sat back down because the alternative felt like making a scene in a motel room that already smelled like panic. She kept answering my phone after that. Each time, she apologized. Each time, the apology sounded more practiced, more efficient. Adjusters called back already briefed, using my words before I'd spoken them. "As you mentioned earlier, Miss Kane," they'd say, and Marisol would nod along, mouthing sorry at me while she took notes in my handwriting, at least a version of it. She'd always had good penmanship. Paperwork appeared on the desk, loss statements, temporary housing requests, itemized inventories. My name printed neatly at the top, my signature at the bottom. "Did you sign these?" I asked, flipping through the pages. Marisol didn't look up. "You did. Yesterday, remember?" I tried to remember. The day blurred together in my head, sirens, smoke, the motel's humming air conditioner. My body still felt like it was vibrating. "I don't think. Live," she said gently. "Stress scrambles memory. Accuracy matters more than feelings right now." That sentence lodged somewhere behind my ribs. As the days stretched on, the motel became a waiting room for other people's disasters. The ice machine clanged all night. Someone's kid cried in the room next door until the crying turned hoarse. Smoke crept in through the cracks around the door and settled into everything we owned. Marisol worked the phone like a job. She kept spreadsheets. She labeled folders. She spoke about we and our losses in a way that made me feel both included and erased. I noticed the language in the paperwork was wrong. Possessions I never owned. Damages I couldn't confirm. A television we donated years ago. Jewelry that had never been mine. When I pointed it out, she frowned, not annoyed, but concerned. "Are you sure? Your aunt's bracelet?" "I don't have an aunt." She paused, then smiled. "Right, I meant mine. It's fine. They just need estimates." The betrayal surfaced quietly, the way rot does. An adjuster thanked me for consolidating claims to speed payouts. Plural, I didn't. I started, but Marisol's hand closed around my wrist, warm and grounding. After the call, she sat across from me on the bed. The motel lamp cast a yellow pool of light that made her eyes look almost golden. "Listen to me," she said. "If you contradict this now, it flags the whole file, delays, audit suspicion. Do you want them digging into everything when people are desperate?" "You filed a second claim under my policy," I said. My voice sounded far away. She didn't deny it. "I folded my losses into yours. It's cost-effective. We're roommates, it makes sense." "That's fraud." Her expression softened. "It's survival." That night I couldn't sleep. The air conditioner rattled like it might give up at any moment. Marisol's breathing was even practiced, as if she could decide when to rest. I got up to use the bathroom and passed her laptop on the desk. The screen glowed faintly. A draft email was open. "Hi. Thank you so much for all your help during this incredibly stressful time. I really appreciate how quickly you're moving things forward." I read the whole thing. It rehearsed my tone, my gratitude, my consent. It anticipated objections I hadn't yet voiced and answered them with my own imagined voice. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk. I grabbed my bag and ran into the smoke. Thick dawn, lungs burning, phone buzzing with calls she'd already queued. At the claims office, they listened politely. Their eyes slid past me to the neat folder Marisol had prepared, already delivered, already logged. "It looks coordinated," one of them said. "Why are you contradicting yourself now?" Weeks later, the investigation closed with a compromise that favored speed over truth. Marisol moved on with her check and a story about helping a friend through disaster. I rebuilt with fewer things and fewer words. Because betrayal doesn't always steal what you have. It files it away as cooperation and dares you to disagree. And even now, when my phone rings from an unfamiliar number, I hesitate. I agreed to let go because she said holding on was what was hurting me. My name is Jamie Miller, and for a long time I mistook relief for love, the quiet that settles when someone else promises to carry the weight of your decisions. That quiet felt like warmth at first, like being wrapped in a heavy blanket, while winter pressed its mouth to the windows. On January 9th, 7:02 a.m. p.m., sleet tapped the glass of our townhouse at 1842 Briarwood Court, Ann Arbor, Michigan. Each pellet a small, polite knock. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the faint sweetness of burnt sugar from the candle Hannah Wright liked to light in the evenings. It was warm. It was quiet. It was closing in, the way a room does when you turn off all the lamps but one. Hannah stood at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, sleeves pushed up, hair twisted into a loose knot. She looked competent, in a way that made my shoulders drop without my permission. She spoke gently about stress, about how capable people still needed help sometimes, and how being capable didn't mean being alone. Her voice was steady, measured, the kind of voice you trust to read instructions aloud. "Just for a while," she said, glancing over her shoulder at me. "Until things settle. You've been carrying too much." I nodded because nodding was easier than explaining the buzzing behind my eyes, the way thoughts slid out of reach if I tried to grab them too fast. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing through slush. Inside, the refrigerator hummed like it was thinking. She started small. That's how it always goes, I think. The dangerous things arriving disguised as favors. Hannah managed my calendar first, color-coding appointments, gently canceling things that made me tense. She answered emails when my chest tightened at the sight of my inbox. She reminded me, softly, patiently, what I'd already agreed to. When I hesitated, she smiled like a nurse, said my anxiety was flaring, that resistance was a symptom, not a choice. "You asked me to help," she'd say, placing her hand over mine. Her skin was always warm. "This is what help looks like." I signed things without reading closely, trusting the tone of her voice more than the words on the page. The paper was smooth, expensive. The pens were heavy, balanced. Hannah would slide documents toward me at the dining table, the overhead light making a small sun on the wood. She'd explain in summaries, neat and reassuring. I learned to watch her mouth instead of the lines of text. The first time I asked to take something to read later, she tilted her head. "Ladder is when you spiral," she said, not unkindly. I remembered feeling embarrassed. I remembered signing. The house learned our routines quickly. Morning light came in pale and reluctant through the blinds, striping the floor. At night, the thermostat clicked on and off, a mechanical heartbeat. Hannah cooked meals that were easy to swallow. She labeled my pill organizer with days of the week in her precise handwriting. She told me when to rest. She told me when to stop asking questions. The filing cabinet lived in the hallway, a tall metal thing we'd inherited from the previous owners. I barely thought about it until the night I needed a warranty for the dishwasher. Hannah was out, running errands. She'd said, keys already in hand. The house felt louder without her, every sound a question mark. I opened the cabinet and flipped through hanging folders until my fingers brushed one thicker than the rest. The tab read trust. My pulse stuttered. I told myself it was probably tax-related. Some boring thing Hannah handled now. I slid it out anyway. Inside were documents transferring financial, legal, and medical authority to Hannah Wright. Page after page. My name repeated until it looked borrowed, like a word you say too many times and suddenly can't recognize. My signature bloomed at the bottom of each page, familiar and wrong all at once. Tucked beneath them was a practice sheet. My signature, written again and again in Hannah's careful hand. The room tilted. The lemon cleaner smell sharpened, acidic in my nose. I pressed my palm to the wall and felt the faint vibration of pipes. I understood, in a cold, precise way, that the early forms hadn't needed me at all. There was a clause I couldn't stop rereading. Refusal to comply constituted incapacity, grounds for long-term care placement. I sat on the floor with the folder open in my lap until the house dimmed around me. When Hannah came home, snow clinging to her coat, I was still there. She didn't raise her voice when I confronted her. She didn't look surprised. She knelt in front of me, took the folder, smoothed the papers like she was calming an animal. "This is for your own good," she said. "You know that?" "I didn't agree to this," I said, my voice thin. It sounded like someone else's. "You did," she replied gently. "You wanted peace. You said you couldn't keep track anymore." "I didn't know. Fighting right now will only prove my point," she said. And there it was, the soft trap closing. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I tried to leave that night. My accounts were frozen. My phone flashed warnings about compromised security. The police called it civil, advised me to cooperate while things were sorted out. Their voices were neutral, practiced. I packed a bag anyway and ran into the freezing dark, lungs burning, every step feeling provisional. They found me 2 days later and spoke to Hannah first. Now my mail goes to her. My decisions are filtered, my resistance documented. I signed my name enough times that it stopped being mine, and somewhere in a folder my consent is still waiting to be enforced. The days after blurred into a careful choreography. Hannah documented everything. She spoke on the phone in low, professional tones, dropping my name like a credential. Appointments appeared on the calendar without my input. A social worker visited, her perfume sharp and floral, her smile fixed. She asked questions that circled like birds, always returning to the same point: was I safe? Did I feel confused? Did I resist help? Hannah answered when I faltered. She always did. At night, the house sounded different. The heater's click felt accusatory. The wind pushed at the siding, a patient insistence. I lay awake, listening to Hannah's breathing beside me, slow and even, and wondered when she'd practiced my signature. At the dining table, while I slept, the thought crept over me like cold. I started keeping notes in the margins of books, on receipts, anywhere Hannah wouldn't look. Dates, times, words she used. The notes felt fragile, like frost patterns you could wipe away with one breath. Sometimes I'd reread them and doubt my own handwriting. It didn't help that Hannah would smile and say, "You wrote that on a bad day." The environment shifted in small ways that made me feel unmoored. Pictures disappeared from the walls. My favorite mug cracked and vanished. The pantry reorganized itself so I couldn't find things by memory. Hannah said it was part of reducing clutter. "You'll feel lighter," she promised. The doctor she chose spoke to me like I was already gone. He asked Hannah how I'd been sleeping. He asked her if I was compliant. When I tried to answer, he nodded without looking up. "I think we're making progress," Hannah said, squeezing my knee. Progress toward what? I wanted to ask. Toward who? I tested the edges where I could. I tried to log into my email from the library computer, the smell of old books grounding me. The password had changed. I tried to withdraw cash. The ATM swallowed my card with a polite beep. Each failure was noted later, calmly, in Hannah's log. "Impulsive," she said, not unkindly. But we expected that. The house grew quieter as winter deepened. Snow piled against the windows, muting the world. I watched it fall, each flake erasing something. Hannah sat at the table with her files, pen moving in smooth strokes. Sometimes she practiced my signature without thinking. Just a habit, the way people doodle. I felt myself thinning, like paper held up to light. The confrontation came on a gray afternoon when the sky pressed low and heavy. I found the folder again, moved from the cabinet to a locked drawer. I don't remember how I got the key. I remember the weight of it in my palm, the click of the lock. "I'm leaving," I said, holding the papers between us like a shield. Hannah looked at me for a long moment, then she smiled, tired this time. "You can't," she said, "and you know that?" I thought of the clause, I thought of the practice sheet, I thought of my name, copied until it was a shape without meaning. Outside, the sleet began again, tapping the windows, patient as ever. Some nights now, when the house is at its quietest, I imagine the folder breathing in the dark, paper swelling and contracting. I imagine my signature lifting off the page and walking toward me, asking to be recognized. I don't know if I'll ever get it back, but I listen, I remember, and I wait. knowing that somewhere, my consent is still waiting to be enforced. I used to believe loyalty accumulated interest, that years of staying late would eventually come due. And the first sign something was wrong was how my calendar began emptying without explanation. My name is Elena Vance, and for most of my career, I survived by being precise. Not loud, not charismatic, just precise. At Veridux Analytics, precision was safety. You documented, you followed process. You didn't take up more space than your role allowed. I did that for over a decade, and for a long time it worked. On March 12th, 9:14 a.m., rain slid down the windows on the 41st floor, and Chicago looked like wet concrete smeared against the glass. I stood at my desk refreshing my calendar, waiting for the weekly client alignment meeting to load. It didn't. The blue block was gone. No cancellation notice, no explanation, just a blank gap where something solid had been. I stared at it longer than necessary. Then I refreshed again. By habit, not panic. Outlook lagged sometimes. Sync errors happened. I told myself that while I checked my sent emails, my team's messages, my phone, nothing. The meeting hadn't moved. It had disappeared. I opened my notebook and wrote the time down. That was another habit: anchor things to paper when systems misbehave. 10 minutes later, a second meeting vanished. Then a third. Not rescheduled, not declined. A gap in the row, just gone. I walked toward my manager's office, the carpet muting my steps. The lights too bright for the gray outside. Karen Phillips was standing near the printer, tapping her badge against the casing while waiting for it to wake up. She looked up when she sensed me, not when she saw me. "Elena, hi." Her smile came on clean and smooth. "Everything okay?" "Quick question," I said. "Did the Mercer call move?" She paused just long enough to choose something. "We're doing some ownership realignment. Nothing you need to worry about." Ownership. The word sat heavy in my stomach. "I wasn't copied," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Karen nodded, still smiling. "Right. For now, just stay flexible." Flexible meant temporary. Temporary meant vulnerable. Everyone at Veridux knew that. As I walked back to my desk, I caught Elliot from HR at the edge of my vision. He was usually effusive, always checking in, always reminding people about wellness initiatives. This time, he looked down at his phone as if it had suddenly become urgent. Maya, who sat 2 rows over and used to lean across the aisle to ask me things she already knew, replied to my Slack message with a single word: "Seen." By lunchtime, my inbox felt wrong. Emails addressed to groups I had always been part of, but no longer. Threads where my name appeared only in quoted context, like a reference to something outdated. I ate at my desk because going to the break room felt like stepping into a room where people would stop talking. At 2:37 p.m., an email arrived that was not meant for me. The subject line was "Bland Q2 Transition Planning," and my name sat in the 200 field lowercase, as if added automatically. I opened it without thinking. It was a coordination thread. Bullet points, deadlines, talking points. My role described entirely in past tense. Deliverables previously owned by Elena will be redistributed as follows. Client-facing continuity must be preserved. Emotional response risk, moderate. I scrolled. There were comments embedded beneath the bullet points. Not jokes exactly, but worse. Efficient. Professional, cold. Ensure exit interview completed by 4:00 a.m. p.m. Friday to avoid weekend payroll processing. Badge deactivation staged. Break room access first. Exits remain active. Security standby confirmed. No prior incidents noted. They weren't speculating about how I'd feel. They were planning around it. Then I saw a line from Karen. "Let's control the optics and keep it clean." Someone had replied beneath it. Agreed. Elena responds well to structured conversations. I felt pressure build behind my eyes. Not tears yet. Something tighter. I minimized the email, then brought it back up, as if it might rearrange itself into something less real. My chair scraped loudly when I stood. Several heads turned. No one said anything. I walked quickly, then faster toward the stairwell. The security desk was staffed. The guard didn't look at me. The stairwell smelled like dust and cleaning solution. I stood there for a full minute, counting my breaths, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. When they didn't, I went outside instead. The rain soaked through my jacket immediately. The building loomed behind me, all glass and steel, reflecting a version of me that already felt slightly delayed, like bad video sync. They didn't fire me that day, or the next. That was the part that dismantled me. My badge still opened the main doors, but not the break room. I discovered that when I tried to order coffee for the floor, my usual Friday routine, the kiosk blinked red. Transaction declined. I tried again. Same result. The barista gave me a polite, rehearsed smile. It says your card's inactive. I stood there too long, wallet in hand, while the line behind me shifted. I paid with my own card and carried the tray upstairs, feeling foolish, exposed. When I set the coffee down, no one thanked me. Later that afternoon, I walked past a glass conference room and stopped. My team was inside laughing. A whiteboard stood at the front, covered in process diagrams. In the corner, someone had written my name, Elena Vance. A single line ran through it. They didn't see me standing there, or they did and chose not to. That night, emails started arriving from unfamiliar addresses. Drafts, notes. Feedback. Conversation pacing was effective. Subject remained calm. Escalation avoided. Recommend same framework for similar transitions. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about the version of me they had already processed. I slept in short bursts. Every notification sound made my chest tighten. I started taking screenshots of everything: emails, access errors, calendar gaps, saving them to a folder labeled personal, then another labeled backup, then a third on a USB drive I kept in my bag. It felt necessary. It also felt insane. Karen scheduled a meeting for Friday afternoon. The subject line read, alignment discussion. I arrived early. The conference room was small, interior, no windows. Karen sat across from me, hands folded neatly on the table. I had the paper in my lap, the printed script I'd found that morning on my chair. I hadn't meant to read it all, but I had, every line, every pause. Karen smiled. Elena, thank you for coming. I looked down at the page. Thank you for coming. We just need to align resources with future needs, she said. I felt something give way inside me, slow and total. She was reading it, word for word. I stopped her. Karen, she blinked, surprised. Yes? I slid the paper onto the table between us. She glanced down. For the first time since this began, her smile faltered. I already know what you're going to say, I told her. My voice sounded steady, even to me. You're not letting me go. You're finishing me. Silence stretched. Then Karen straightened. This conversation is confidential, she said carefully. I stood. The chair leg scraped again, sharp and loud. As I walked out, my badge worked on the exit, but not on the inner doors. Security watched me go. In the lobby, I saw her, a new hire, sitting at my desk. Neat posture, neutral clothes, already invisible. She was smiling at her screen, absorbed, useful. No one noticed me pass. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled like damp stone and exhaust. I stood there for a moment, empty-handed, understanding, finally what I had been. Not family, not valued, a battery. And somewhere above me, the next one was already charging. I didn't notice the fog at first. It settled so gently, I mistook it for fatigue. It felt reasonable, at the beginning, to be tired. Late August in Madison always carried that syrupy heaviness, the kind that pressed against your skin even indoors, even with the windows cracked, and the fan rattling uselessly in the corner. I remember standing barefoot in my kitchen at 927 Linden Street, linoleum cool under my feet, staring at the sink while the light above it hummed. Not loudly, just enough to notice if I stopped moving. My name is Emily Carter, and the most frightening thing about losing your footing is how reasonable it feels while it's happening. On August 21st, 6:18 a.m. p.m., humid dusk leaned against my apartment windows like a body waiting to be let in. The air smelled faintly of hot asphalt and lake water drifting up from Mendota. Cicadas buzzed in uneven waves, and somewhere down the block a screen door slammed, sharp and final, like punctuation. I stood there longer than I meant to, my mind lagging a half step behind my body. I knew I was supposed to be doing something, unloading groceries maybe, or answering a text. But the thought kept dissolving before it finished forming. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear, just a soft, spreading blankness like cotton packed behind my eyes. When Mark Thompson knocked later that evening, I felt relieved. He had a way of arriving that made everything feel organized. 2 firm knocks, a pause, then one lighter one, as if to say he didn't want to startle me. When I opened the door, he smiled the way you smile at someone you're worried about, but don't want to alarm. His shirt smelled like clean laundry and the faint citrus of soap. He stepped inside and immediately reached for the window, nudging it open an inch more. "God, it's stuffy in here," he said gently. "Have you been drinking water?" I laughed because that seemed like the right response. "I think so. You think so?" he repeated, not mocking, just noting it. He set his keys in the bowl by the door, the one I'd bought at a thrift store years ago. I didn't remember telling him that, but he knew. He always knew those things. We sat on the couch, knees almost touching. The fan clicked back and forth, pushing warm air across my skin. Mark watched me with his head tilted slightly, as if listening for something under my words. "You seemed off earlier," he said. "On the phone." I searched my memory. The call floated up in fragments, my voice, stretched thin, Mark asking if I'd eaten, a pause where I couldn't remember what he'd just said. "I was just tired," I told him. "That's what you said," he agreed. "But you also said you felt disconnected, like you weren't quite here." I frowned. "Did I?" He smiled again, softer this time. "It's okay if you don't remember everything. That's kind of the point." The fog didn't descend all at once, it gathered. It waited. It learned the shape of me. Over the next few days, Mark began reminding me of conversations I couldn't fully recall. Not in a dramatic way, casually, over coffee, while brushing his teeth, while we stood in line at the grocery store under fluorescent lights that made everyone look faintly ill. "You already told me you didn't want to go this weekend," he said once, scrolling through his phone. "I did." My stomach tightened. "Yeah," he said. "You were pretty clear about it." I tried to picture myself saying it, my tone, my reasons, but the memory slid away, leaving only the impression of having disappointed someone. "Okay," I said finally. "Then, okay." He laughed softly and squeezed my hand as if proud of me for accepting it. The physical sensations came next. A pressure behind my eyes like I'd been staring at a screen too long, a muffled quality to sound, as though cotton had been packed into my ears. Sometimes my own voice sounded delayed, arriving a second after I'd already felt my mouth move. It was subtle enough that I didn't mention it at first. When I did, Mark nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I was worried about," he said. He started using that phrase a lot, "worried about you." He said it the way you'd talk about a loose step on a staircase. Concerned, measured, already imagining the fall. When I questioned myself when I said, "I don't remember agreeing to that," or "that doesn't sound like something I'd say." He never argued. He laughed softly, a little breath through his nose. "You've been under a lot of stress," he'd say. "You know that?" I did know that, or at least, I knew I was supposed to. The first time he called my parents, he framed it as a safety net. "I just want them to be aware," he told me, phone already in his hand. "In case you need support." "I don't need." I started, but the words tangled. My chest felt tight, my thoughts slippery. He watched me carefully, then nodded, as if confirming something. "See," he said kindly. "This is what I mean." My mother's voice on speaker was warm and anxious, familiar in a way that made me suddenly very tired. "Honey," she said, "Mark says you've been having a rough time." I looked at him, startled. He gave me a look that said, "Be honest." "I'm fine," I said, and even to me it sounded unconvincing. From there, everything widened. A doctor friend of Mark's introduced casually over dinner. A suggestion that I might benefit from talking to someone. Appointments scheduled, just to check in. Forms I didn't remember filling out but recognized my own signature on. Mark came with me to everything. He sat beside me in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and old magazines, his knee steady against mine. When I spoke, he listened intently. When I hesitated, he stepped in smoothly. "What Emily means," he'd say, "is that she's been feeling overwhelmed." Heads nodded. Pen scratched. I watched my words turn into symptoms in real time. I started keeping notes. At first, it was just reminders: what I ate, who I talked to, what I felt when I woke up. I wrote in a spiral notebook with a blue pen that smeared slightly if I dragged my hand across the page. The act of writing felt grounding, the paper rough and real beneath my fingers. Then I started doubting the notes. The handwriting looked wrong sometimes, too slanted, too tight. I'd read an entry and feel no recognition, as if I were spying on a stranger's thoughts. I began annotating my own words, circling phrases, adding question marks in the margins. Did I really feel this? Or did Mark suggest it? The fog thickened when I tried to answer. The therapist was new. Mark had found her after saying the last one didn't seem like a good fit. Her office was in a converted house near campus, the kind with creaky wooden stairs and framed prints that tried very hard to be calming. She was sharp-eyed, quiet, didn't fill silence the way others did. She let me talk, really talk. Without translating my pauses, halfway through the session, she leaned forward slightly and asked, "Who benefits if you're unwell?" The question landed like a dropped plate, sudden, unmistakable. For a moment, the fog thinned. I saw Mark's face in my mind, not smiling but intent. I felt a flash of something like anger, hot and clarifying. I started and stopped. My heart was pounding. The answer felt dangerous, sharp-edged. "I don't know." She nodded, as if that was enough for now. When I told Mark I needed space, it happened in my kitchen. Late afternoon, light slanting across the counter. I'd practiced the words in my head, anchoring them to the feel of the chair under my thighs, the smell of coffee grounds in the trash. "I think I need some time alone," I said, "just to clear my head." His face didn't harden, it lit up with urgency. "Emily," he said, reaching for his phone. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." He stepped outside, door closing softly behind him, and I heard his voice through the thin wood, calm, reassuring. "See? She's cutting people off. It's happening again." Something inside me snapped into place. The trap revealed itself not as a single moment, but as a system self-sustaining, elegant. Concern looping into proof justifying control. I grabbed my bag with shaking hands. My heart hammered, lungs burning like I'd been underwater too long. The hallway smelled like dust and old carpet. As I ran down the stairs, I half expected someone to stop me, to gently guide me back inside. No one did. Outside, the air felt cooler, thinner. Each breath hurt, but it was mine. I walked until my legs trembled, then kept walking. The fog clung to me for weeks afterward, thinning slowly, receding in patches. It left bruises where certainty had been. My family apologized carefully, ashamed but unconvinced. Mark tells people he tried to save me and failed. Sometimes late at night, when the cicadas start up and the air grows heavy again, I still doubt myself. But now I know who taught me how. I trusted him because he cataloged my memories better than I did. And I mistook order for care. The sleet that night had a way of speaking thin, insistent hissing against the glass panes of the Marrow archive, a sound like breath held too long and released through teeth. Inside, the building exhaled dust and cold. Paper breathed here, so did I. I had learned to move softly among the stacks, to listen for the difference between a book settling and a step that did not belong to me. It was December 4th, 8:06 a.m. p.m., and the clocks along the canal-facing wall were all 1 minute out of sync, a quirk I had never bothered to correct. Time behaved differently around collections. It always had. My name is Claire Donnelly, and my fear has always been that truth can be curated until it disappears. I had come to the archive because I believed in the stubbornness of records, the way ink resists forgetting, the way a receipt can outlive a marriage. The Marrow was a municipal institution with a private soul. Brick walls that sweated in winter, iron shelving that rang faintly when the building cooled, lamps that cast islands of amber light and left the aisles in a permanent dusk. You could lose hours here without realizing it, lose days if you wanted to. We all did, in our way. Noah Pierce liked to say preservation was a moral act. He said it with his hands folded, fingers precise, like a person who trusted his own control. What we save determines what survives, he told me the first week we worked together. And I remember thinking it was a beautiful sentence, dangerous in its neatness, but beautiful. He had a habit of pausing before nouns, weighing them. His voice always sounded slightly closer than it should have, as if he leaned into conversations without moving. We were research partners on a state-funded project to digitize and cross-reference regional materials shipping manifests, court ledgers, private diaries donated by families who wanted permanence without exposure. We cataloged lives in pencil and code. We indexed grief, I loved the work for its quiet rigor, the way you could spend an afternoon with a single box and feel like you had done something necessary. When the grant audit loomed, Noah offered to consolidate our notes. "Just to streamline," he said, tapping the edge of my legal pad with his pen. "We'll be safer if the citations are uniform, less room for misinterpretation." He smiled in that careful way of his, like a man offering a hand on a slippery stair. I said yes because the ask sounded reasonable, because fatigue had made my handwriting slope, because I trusted the binders he kept immaculate. I said yes, because I wanted to believe collaboration could be clean. The first thing I noticed was a box missing from the northeast aisle, third shelf down, the Hollander correspondence. Brittle envelopes tied with a frayed blue ribbon. I had shelved it myself 2 nights earlier. The absence rang louder than a misfiled volume. I stood there longer than necessary, fingers resting on the shelf edge, skin cooling against the metal. "You moved it?" I asked later, trying to keep my tone light. We were at the shared table, lamps humming, Noah's laptop open to a grid of dates and identifiers that looked like a city scene from above. He didn't look up, did I? A beat. I consolidated some materials for the audit prep. "You've been pulling late hours. Fatigue makes liars of our senses." He smiled then, finally meeting my eyes. "I did you a favor." The phrase landed with a softness that made it difficult to argue. I told myself it was nothing, that boxes wander when you handle them enough. The archive has a way of reordering you too. I went back to my notes and worked until my eyes burned. The smell of dust thick as chalk in my throat. Strange gaps followed. Dates in the catalog subtly shifted, nothing dramatic. A day forward here, a month there. Boxes I remembered shelving now appeared under different accession numbers. I told myself to slow down. I started keeping a separate list, a private ledger in my bag, the paper rough against my palm. The pencil felt grounding. Noah noticed. He always noticed. "Redundancy," he said mildly, when he saw me copying references twice. "It introduces error." "It introduces safety," I replied, sharper than I meant to be. He laughed, a short sound. "Safety is a feeling. Accuracy is a practice." I began to dream in footnotes. Parentheticals bloomed behind my eyes when I closed them. The building took on a presence I had never allowed myself to name. The way the aisles narrowed at night. The way the lamps hummed a note that made my teeth itch. The way the canal water slapped against stone like a pulse you could synchronize to if you stood still long enough. The locked cabinet revealed itself on a night the sleet turned to freezing rain. The cabinet was old oak, its brass keyhole polished by hands that believed in secrets. It sat at the end of a dead aisle we rarely used, where the ceiling dipped and the air smelled faintly of oil. I don't know what drew me there. I had been looking for a ledger I could not find, my private list growing heavy with absences. I pulled the cabinet door and felt resistance. It shouldn't have been locked. The key was on Noah's ring. I knew that without knowing how I knew. My heart started doing that hollow thump it does when you realize you've stepped into traffic and survived. I stood there listening to the archive breathe. Somewhere, a radiator knocked. The lamps flickered, not dramatically, just enough to remind me of their age. I did not take the key that night. I told myself restraint was wisdom. I went home with my hands smelling like dust and metal. My coat stiff with ice. The next day, Noah was late. Late enough to feel deliberate. I watched the clock over the canal tick forward, the second hand catching for a fraction of a second each time. When he arrived, he was flushed, scarf damp. He apologized without urgency. "I need the key," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "4. He set his bag down, careful. "The cabinet in the north annex." A pause then. "What cabinet?" "The one you locked." He looked at me the way you look at a person misremembering a name. "Claire, there are no locked cabinets assigned to our project." The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. The audit had become a review. Language did that here, shifted like ice, thin until it broke. In the days between, I found my annotations rewritten in his voice. It happened all at once, or it felt like it did. I unlocked the cabinet on a night when the building felt too attentive, the rain tapping a code against the windows. Inside were my notes, neat as if printed, my marginalia smoothed into complete sentences that bore Noah's cadence. Footnotes redirected, discoveries attributed forward in time, mine erased by chronology. He had built a narrative where my work became his supervision, my findings his synthesis. The smell inside the cabinet was faintly sweet, old paper and something like varnish. I sat on the floor with the door open, the cold seeping into my bones. I read until the words lost their meaning. When I confronted him, my voice shook despite my efforts. "You rewrote me," I said. He did not deny it. He tilted his head, considering. "History prefers clean authorship," he said. "Collaboration dilutes credit. You erased me. I clarified you." We stood between the stacks, the lamps casting long bars of light across his face. He looked calm, almost relieved. "This isn't personal," he added, as if that helped. "Institutions need coherence." The hearing room smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee. The committee sat behind a table too long for the space. Their binders immaculate. Noah's were labeled in a font I recognized from his laptop. Mine were a stack of papers that felt suddenly fragile. My private ledger heavy in my bag. They asked questions that assumed answers, dates, sequences, responsibilities. When I corrected them, they nodded and wrote inconsistent in the margins. A phrase Noah used, archival ambiguity, echoed a memo I'd never signed. The words felt like a verdict before it was spoken. After he touched my elbow lightly in the hall, "You should rest," he said. "This kind of stress, don't." I snapped. He smiled anyway. "We'll get through it." I ran that night through aisles of shelves, heart slamming, pulling boxes like lifelines. The alarms were old, temperamental. He followed calmly, reminding me that alarms would only prove instability. His footsteps were measured. Mine were not. I grabbed a crate from the locked cabinet, wooden, heavier than it looked, and a borrowed badge from a hook by the exit. My hands went numb in the sleet. My lungs burned like I had been running my whole life. Outside, the canal was a strip of black glass. The city felt distant, muffled by ice. I did not look back. Weeks later, Noah Pierce announced a publication based on recovered materials. The archive congratulated him for safeguarding institutional memory. My appeal stalled while his citations multiplied. I kept the crate hidden in my apartment, under a table by the radiator, the wood warming and cooling with the day. Sometimes late at night, I thought I heard paper shifting inside, settling. I tell myself proof exists even if it isn't indexed. I tell myself names can be restored. But the truth is quieter than that. Betrayal doesn't burn records. It edits them until your name no longer fits. I trusted her because she had known me before the divorce, before the silence started following me home. That trust settled into my body the way habits do, quietly without ceremony, until it felt less like a choice and more like a condition of breathing. I didn't question it when I first noticed the fog that November morning, how it pressed low against the asphalt of the school parking lot, swallowing the tires of parked cars up to their rims. Fog always felt appropriate around schools. I'd thought back then, like the day itself was hesitant to begin. Stonehaven Elementary smelled the way it always did at that hour. Lemon disinfectant, old paper, burnt coffee drifting from the teacher's lounge. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, slightly out of sync with one another. A faint vibration that I felt more in my teeth than my ears. I remember adjusting my coat as I walked down the hall, smoothing the fabric at my shoulders, grounding myself in the routine. Routine had become my anchor after the divorce. Bells, lesson plans, attendance sheets, predictable things. "Morning, Rachel," a voice called softly behind me. I turned and saw Tara Whitlock standing near her office door, one hand resting on the frame, coffee balanced in the other. She wore neutral colors almost exclusively, beige, gray, soft blues that never startled the eye. Her smile was practiced but warm, the kind designed to invite confidence rather than demand it. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly. "Did you sleep at all?" I laughed because that was what people did when they were asked questions like that. "I slept," I said. "Enough." She tilted her head, studying me in that way that made me feel seen without feeling exposed. "If you need anything today," she said, "I'm here. You don't have to carry everything alone." At the time, that sentence felt like relief. I didn't realize it was also a blueprint. The first sign that something was wrong came disguised as inconvenience, an email from a parent I didn't recognize thanking me for a meeting I had no memory of. I stared at the message in my inbox, rereading it slowly, then faster, my pulse ticking up with each pass. Thank you for taking the time yesterday to discuss my concerns about classroom management. I appreciate your honesty and willingness to adjust. I searched my sent folder. Nothing. I checked my calendar. No meeting scheduled. I told myself it was a simple mistake, wrong teacher, wrong address. It happened all the time. When I mentioned it to Tara later that morning, she didn't dismiss it, which I appreciated. She listened, leaning back in her chair, fingers steepled lightly beneath her chin. Stress does strange things to memory, she said gently. Especially when you're trying to keep everything running smoothly. Do you want me to reach out to the parent and clarify? The offer felt generous. I nodded, relieved. That would help, I said. Of course, she replied. That's what I'm here for. The relief lasted exactly 2 days. By the end of the week, there were 3 more emails. A note slipped into my mailbox referencing a phone call I didn't recall, a hallway conversation where a colleague thanked me for agreeing to a schedule change I had never discussed. Each time the same quiet panic bloomed in my chest, then retreated when I explained it away. I was tired, distracted, healing. After the divorce, silence had moved into my house like an uninvited tenant. It lingered in corners, stretched long across evenings. Sometimes I would stand in my kitchen holding a glass of water, unable to remember why I'd walked there. Those moments frightened me, but they were fleeting, manageable. I told myself this was just an extension of a temporary fog. Nothing more. Tara checked in more often then. She'd stop me in the hallway, send short emails asking how I was holding up. Once, she brought me a cup of tea during my planning period. The steam smelling faintly of chamomile and something floral I couldn't name. You've been under a lot of pressure, she said, setting the mug on my desk. Anyon would be. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. The missing things escalated slowly. A lesson plan I was certain I'd printed, gone from my desk. Sticky notes rearranged. A parent complaint filed under my name that I didn't remember addressing. When I asked the front office, they told me it had already been handled. You signed off on it, the secretary said, scrolling through her computer. See. The digital signature looked like mine, slight slant to the right, the flourish on the last letter. I stared at it longer than necessary, heat crawling up my neck. That afternoon, I stood in my classroom after the students had gone home, the chairs stacked neatly on desks. The floor scuffed with the day's footprints. The room smelled like pencil shavings and dry erase markers. I pressed my palms flat against the teacher's desk, feeling the faint grooves etched by years of use, and tried to remember the complaint, tried to summon any fragment of the conversation it supposedly resolved. Nothing came. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, distorted by the glass. I looked tired, older than I remembered. The thought lodged itself uncomfortably in my mind. What if this is happening, and I just don't know it? When I finally worked up the courage to say that out loud, Tara nodded as if I'd confirmed something she'd suspected all along. That kind of self-awareness is important, she said. And brave, she suggested, keeping a journal documenting interactions. Just for your own peace of mind, she said. We can compare notes if something feels off. The idea sounded practical, reassuring. I bought a notebook that night, the cover a muted green, the pages thick and smooth. I wrote dates, times, short summaries of conversations. At first, it helped. The act of writing steadied me, anchored events to ink. Then the handwriting began to change. I noticed it one evening while flipping back through earlier entries. Some letters were sharper, more angular, the spacing inconsistent. It was subtle enough that I might not have caught it if I hadn't been looking so closely. I held my pen above the page and wrote my name 3 times in the margin, comparing the strokes. The differences were small but undeniable. My chest tightened. The next day, Tara glanced at the notebook when I brought it to her office, her expression thoughtful. See, she said softly, you're not imagining things, but this is why support systems matter. You don't have to go through this alone. I wanted to ask her why some entries felt foreign to me, why I didn't remember writing them at all. Instead, I nodded, letting her reassurance wash over me like warm water. The locked drawer in her office was an accident. I hadn't meant to open it. I was there after hours, returning a folder she'd lent me. The building unusually quiet, the custodial staff already gone. Her door was ajar, the lights off except for the desk lamp casting a small pool of yellow light. I set the folder down and turned to leave when I noticed the drawer partially open, the metal catching the light. Something about it tugged at me, a wrongness I couldn't articulate. I pulled it open. Inside were files, neatly organized. My name typed cleanly on the tabs. My mouth went dry as I lifted the first folder. The paper smelled faintly of toner and something else lavender. Maybe the same scent she wore. The report inside was detailed, clinical, documenting missed deadlines, emotional volatility, concerns about classroom stability. It was written in my voice. I recognized the phrasing, the way I structured sentences, even the small idiosyncrasies, the dash instead of a comma, the parenthetical asides. At the bottom was my signature. My knees weakened. I sat heavily in the chair, the leather cold against the backs of my legs, and opened another folder. And another. Each one painted a picture of gradual unraveling, a teacher struggling quietly, valiantly, until it became too much, until intervention was necessary. I didn't hear Tara enter until she spoke. I was wondering when you'd find those. Her voice was calm, almost tender. I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, the hall light framing her silhouette. Why? The word came out thin, barely audible. She closed the door behind her, the click of the latch echoing too loudly in the small room. Because someone had to, she said, and you weren't capable. I stood, the files clutched to my chest like a shield. You forged these, I said. You made it look like the truth. She interrupted gently. Rachel, look at yourself. Her gaze swept over me, assessing. I felt suddenly exposed, every doubt and fear laid bare. I was protecting the students, she continued. Protecting you too. I covered for you as long as I could, but it became too dangerous. The words blurred together, a low roar filling my ears. You're lying, I said, but the conviction wasn't there. She stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was light, steady. You need rest, she whispered. Let us take care of this. The next hours unfolded like a dream I couldn't wake from. Administrators in serious suits, security escorting me through hallways that felt suddenly unfamiliar. My badge didn't work when I tried to swipe it at the exit. Tara walked beside me, her hand still on my arm, guiding me gently. It's going to be okay, she murmured, for my ears alone. Outside, the fog had lifted, leaving the world stark and overexposed. Parents watched from a distance, their faces carefully neutral. I ran when we reached the parking lot. My heart hammered as I fled down rows of cars, the sound of my breath loud in my ears. No one chased me. The investigation took weeks. By the time it cleared me, the damage was already done. My classroom had been reassigned. Tara had been promoted, praised for her vigilance, her dedication to preventing a crisis. In the grocery store, parents avoided my eyes. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Trust, I learned, is easily reassigned, sometimes late at night. I hear my name spoken and her voice calm, authoritative echoing in my quiet house. I stand in the dark, listening, trying to decide if it's memory or something else entirely, because betrayal doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And once it teaches others how easily you can be erased, it doesn't stop. I was certain before I was careful, and that confidence ruined me. I used to think certainty was a kind of love, not the soft, patient kind that asks questions and leaves room for doubt, but the sharp, declarative kind that plants its feet and dares the world to contradict it. The kind that feels like strength, the kind that, once spoken out loud, rearranges everything around it to stay true. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I learned, too late, that certainty can be trained, sharpened, and handed back to you like a weapon with your fingerprints already on the handle. On June 18, 8:32 p.m., the heat pressed down on 318 Ashford Avenue, Columbus, Ohio, the kind of Midwestern summer evening where the air smells like charcoal, lawn clippings, and judgment. Neighbors lingered on porches longer than they needed to. The cicadas screamed like they were keeping score. Every window glowed amber, domestic, safe. I remember thinking how solid everything felt, how earned. I had just come back inside from the backyard, fingers greasy from corn on the cob, when my phone buzzed. A message preview from Michael Trent, one line. Can we talk? I smiled, because at that point I still believed talks were for fixing things. I had built my life around loyalty the way some people build houses around foundations. Once you choose, You don't keep checking the ground. You trust that what you stood on yesterday will still be there tomorrow. I had chosen Jessica Cole, and I wore that choice openly, loudly, like a badge I expected people to respect. They didn't. It started with looks, lingering pauses in conversation, a change in tone when her name came up. Friends who used to smile at us together now smiled at me alone, with a carefulness that felt like pity wearing polite clothes. Then came the warnings, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet interruptions. Hey, someone would say, lowering their voice like they were about to tell me a secret about the weather. I don't know how to say this, but I never let them finish. I interrupted, corrected, defended. My voice would harden before theirs even settled. I accused them of jealousy, of projecting, of wanting to fracture something good, because their own lives felt smaller next to it. I said things like, "You don't know her like I do." I said, "Context matters." I said, "You're seeing what you want to see." Every time I spoke, I felt taller. The first real crack came from Evan. He was my oldest friend, the kind of history that doesn't need maintenance. We'd shared childhood bedrooms, late-night drives, bad decisions we laughed about years later. If there was one person whose concern should have slowed me down, it was him. He didn't ease into it. He showed me his phone. The photo was grainy but clear enough. A bar booth, dim lighting, neon bleeding into shadows. Jessica, unmistakable, her head tilted in that familiar way when she laughed. Her hand rested on another man's thigh, casual, possessive, intimate. I remember the way my stomach dropped, not from belief, but from anger. I laughed. A short, sharp sound that surprised even me. "That's fake," I said. "You can do anything with apps now. You know that." Evan didn't raise his voice. That made it worse. "Look at the timestamp," he said. "Look at the place. That's Mulligan's on 4th. She told you she was working late that night." I waved my hand like I was brushing away smoke. "You've always loved drama," I said. "You always think you see patterns." That was when his face changed. Not angry, not hurt, just tired. "I'm not trying to win," he said. "I'm trying to warn you." I blocked him that night, blocked him and anyone else who questioned me. Group chats went silent. Invitations stopped coming. I told myself it was because people couldn't stand how solid we were, how committed. Jessica cried when I told her. Real tears, warm against my neck, her hands shaking just enough to feel genuine. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me when no one else would." I held her tighter, proud of how fiercely I'd chosen her, proud of the lines I'd drawn and the people I'd pushed out to protect what was mine. That was the first night I slept deeply in months. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, like a story told out of order. Each piece small enough to ignore until there were too many to step around, a receipt in the glove compartment for a restaurant she'd never mentioned. A charge from a hotel I'd driven past 100 times without noticing, a voicemail she forgot to delete. Her voice soft, playful, saying someone else's name like it belonged in her mouth. Every discovery felt less like shock and more like nausea, a slow, rolling sickness. I didn't confront her right away. I told myself I was being rational, careful, that I was gathering context, but the truth was uglier. I was afraid of what admitting it would mean about me, about how loudly I'd defended her, about the bridges I'd burned with my own hands, about the way my certainty had smothered every chance someone had tried to give me to see clearly. When I finally said something, it wasn't dramatic. We were standing in the kitchen. The overhead light flickered, not broken, just old. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. She was scrolling on her phone like nothing in the world was waiting to be said. "I know," I said. She looked up. Her expression didn't collapse, didn't scramble. It settled. "Oh," she said. That was it. No denial, no counterattack. Just a tired exhale, like a project that had run its course. "I didn't mean for it to get so complicated," she said. "You made it easy, you know that?" The words landed wrong, sharp, recruited. "I trusted you," I said. She nodded, already halfway gone. "You trusted yourself more." After she left, the house sounded different. Bigger, hollower. Every room echoed with the version of me that had once stood there defending her. I tried to apologize. I drafted messages I never sent, rehearsed phone calls in my head, practiced sounding humble instead of desperate. When I finally reached out, the responses were polite, distant, lives already rearranged without me in them. Evan never replied. That's when the shame settled in. Not the hot, immediate kind, but the slow, chronic ache that seeps into everything. I replayed my defenses at night, heard my own voice sounding righteous, cruel, remembered the way I'd cut people off mid-sentence, how good it felt to be so sure. Sleep stopped coming easily, sounds grew sharper, the house creaked in unfamiliar ways. I started checking my phone compulsively, half expecting messages that never came, half dreading ones that might. I began to wonder how much of my life had been shaped by my need to be right. The thought followed me everywhere, into grocery stores, into conversations with strangers, into the mirror where my own reflection started to feel accusatory. I caught myself rewriting memories, softening my tone in recollections, casting myself as misunderstood rather than complicit. That's when the dreams started. In them, I was always arguing, always mid-sentence, always convinced I just needed one more explanation to make everything make sense. People stood around me, mouths moving without sound, while I talked and talked and talked. I woke up hoarse, jaw aching like I'd been speaking all night. The house began to feel crowded, not with people, with versions of myself. The woman who defended, the woman who dismissed, the woman who chose certainty over care. They lingered in doorways, in reflections, in the pause before I turned off a light. I started hearing my own voice when no one was there. Not whispers, not hallucinations, just memory, replayed with such clarity it felt present. Context matters. You don't know her like I do. You're seeing what you want to see. Each line landed like a verdict. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the houses across the street, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, a voicemail. I didn't recognize the voice at first. It took a second listen. It was mine, not recorded recently, older. A fragment from some forgotten moment, lifted and replayed. My voice firm and absolute, saying, "I don't need proof. I know." I deleted it, then checked my sent messages, my call log, nothing. The next night, another voicemail, another sentence, another certainty. I started leaving the lights on. Friends I'd pushed away appeared in public places, always just out of reach. I thought I saw Evan once, standing across a parking lot, his face unreadable. When I moved closer, he was gone. The house smelled wrong, like stale air trapped too long, like something sealed and waiting. I began to suspect that the betrayal hadn't ended when Jessica left, that it had simply changed shape, that every defense I'd ever voiced had learned how to speak without me. One night, lying awake, I realized the most frightening part wasn't that I'd been lied to. It was that I'd helped build the lie, reinforced it, defended it so thoroughly it no longer needed her to survive. Certainty, I learned, doesn't disappear when it's proven wrong. It waits, it rehearses, and when it comes back, it sounds exactly like you. Innocence is not a reset button. It's just the absence of a sentence. And the day I learned that, I understood how quietly a life can be rearranged without anyone ever raising their voice. My name is Alex Mercer, and the investigation ended on a Tuesday. HR called it a resolution meeting, which already felt dishonest. Words were doing a lot of work that year. Concern, alignment, culture. I remember the room more than the people in it. The faint chemical lemon smell of disinfectant. The hum of the air vent clicking on and off like it was clearing its throat. The way the table's laminate edge was peeling just enough to snag skin if you weren't careful. Mara, the HR director, slid the paper across to me without meeting my eyes. Her nails were a muted pink, chipped at the corners. She'd chosen that color carefully, something that suggested calm and neutrality. "You're fully cleared," she said, as if announcing the weather. "No findings, no action required." Fully cleared, two words that were supposed to feel like release but landed, instead, like a technicality. I waited for something else, an apology maybe, or at least a recognition of the weeks I'd spent waking up nauseous. Rereading emails for hidden sins, replaying conversations in my head until they lost their edges. Nothing came. The paper was thin. I could see the wood grain of the table through it. When I stood, my chair legs screamed against the tile, too loud for such a small movement. Mara flinched. Then she smiled, quick and professional, the way people do when they think the moment has already passed. On February 7th, 10:03 a.m., pale winter light washed the open floor of Northline Analytics, turning every desk into a witness stand. The building had always been bright glass walls, white surfaces, the illusion of transparency baked into the architecture, but that morning it felt interrogative. Light pooled on keyboards, reflected off monitors, exposed fingerprints on the break room microwave door I'd never noticed before. People smiled at me, careful smiles. They stepped aside in hallways, lowering their voices like I carried something transmissible. It wasn't hostility. That would have been easier. It was courtesy with distance, the kind you give someone whose situation you don't want to understand too deeply. "Hey Alex," Jen from compliance said, pausing at the coffee machine. "Glad everything's resolved." Resolved. Another word that implied finality without repair. She didn't wait for a response. The coffee grinder roared to life, drowning out whatever I might have said anyway. Meetings resumed, but I was no longer asked to lead. I still attended. My calendar remained full, dutifully populated by Outlook invites. But my role had shifted subtly. Like a chair moved an inch back from the table, I spoke, and my ideas landed flat, sinking without ripple. 10 minutes later, someone else would phrase the same thought differently and receive nods. Follow-up questions, traction. I learned to recognize my own ideas wearing other people's voices, laundered until they were safe again. I told myself not to be paranoid. That word had started to glow in my mind. Dangerous and self-indicting. I focused on tangible things instead. The click of keys, the low murmur of side conversations, the way the HVAC dried the air, until my knuckles cracked and bled. I ate lunch at my desk because it felt easier than navigating the kitchen, where conversations stalled when I entered, then resumed with forced enthusiasm once I left. The betrayal surfaced quietly. There was no dramatic reveal, no confrontation in a hallway, just a line item buried in an email thread I wasn't meant to see. Greg Sullivan, the junior analyst I'd mentored, the one whose first project I'd saved from collapse, who'd cried in a conference room when his model failed under review, and thanked me later for not letting him quit. He'd framed it as risk mitigation, a concern raised in good faith. His language was clean and professional, stripped of anything that might suggest motive. I read his words on my screen, black text on white, and felt something sour settle in my chest, slow and heavy. It wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief, like reading your own name in a stranger's obituary. I replayed late nights coaching him, the coffees, the encouragement. The way he'd asked, "Am I cut out for this?" And the way I'd answered without hesitation, "Yes, you are." Memory has a way of sharpening itself when you need it to hurt. When I tried to talk to him, he thanked me for understanding boundaries now. His tone was rehearsed, careful. We stood near the elevators, the carpet worn thin where people queued every day. At 5, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I didn't want to make it personal," he said, as if that absolved him. "It was about protecting the team." "I was cleared," I said. The words felt defensive, smaller than I expected. "Of course," he replied quickly, "and I respect that. But you can see how it looked, right? I could see how anything could be made to look like anything if you wanted it badly enough." The clearance memo didn't travel as far as the accusation had. Suspicion lingered like a smell, no one named. It clung to me in elevators, in Slack threads where my messages went unanswered for hours, then days. My badge felt heavier against my chest, the lanyard rubbing my neck raw. I started dreaming about it, losing it, breaking it, watching it dissolve in my hands like sugar. Then came the town hall. The auditorium lights were dimmed, the stage washed in soft blue. Leadership spoke about resilience, about values. Words floated overhead, disconnected from bodies. When Greg's name was announced, applause broke out, spontaneous and warm. He was promoted for protecting the culture, rewarded for identifying a threat that had already been disproven. I clapped because everyone did. My palms stung with each strike, heat blooming under the skin. I kept my face neutral, pleasant. Somewhere inside, something folded in on itself, neat and irreversible. Afterward, colleagues congratulated him warmly, then nodded at me with relief, as if justice had been efficient. A problem identified, a process followed, an outcome delivered. The system worked. I updated my resume that night, deleting accomplishments that now felt fictional. Metrics I'd once been proud of seemed exaggerated. Suspect, I took a smaller job months later, a lateral move disguised as a fresh start. It didn't erase the looks. They followed me like a footnote, attached to my name wherever it appeared. I understand it now. Innocence removes punishment, not doubt. Reputations don't heal, they calcify. And somewhere, a lesson is being taught. Destroying a career can be a pathway up. That lesson didn't stop echoing just because I left the building. It followed me into the new office, smaller and older, where the carpet smelled faintly of dust and burned coffee. The windows didn't open. The light was fluorescent and unforgiving. I told myself I was grateful. That gratitude was safer than resentment. I worked hard, kept my head down, learned names, then learned which ones to forget. Still, things began to feel off. It started with emails, small discrepancies. A forwarded message missing a line I remembered clearly, a calendar invite disappearing, then reappearing with a different organizer. I blamed the system at first, the way everyone does. Technology is an easy scapegoat. It doesn't argue back. Then there were the comments in meetings that seemed to reference conversations I hadn't had. Like you said earlier, someone would begin glancing at me expectantly, and I'd feel that familiar lurch in my stomach. I learned to nod, to smile, to let the moment pass without exposing the gap. Better to seem forgetful than unstable. At night, I lay awake cataloging evidence. Not proof, never proof, just impressions. Patterns that might have been coincidence if they weren't so consistent. I started keeping notes, handwritten, because writing by hand felt more real, harder to alter. Dates. Times. Who said what? The notebook lived in my bag, its weight reassuring. The office had a sound at night, a low electrical hum that seemed to settle into my bones. Sometimes, when I stayed late, I swore I heard footsteps behind me. The soft whisper of shoes on carpet. Each time I turned, there was nothing. Just empty rows of desks, monitors dark, my own reflection faintly visible in the glass. I began to wonder if Greg had taught me something without intending to. That documentation mattered. That narratives could be shaped quietly, professionally, without anyone ever raising their voice. I thought about his promotion, the applause, the way the room had felt united in that moment. Consensus is a powerful thing. It doesn't require truth, just alignment. One afternoon, I found my name on a whiteboard in a conference room I hadn't booked. Underneath it, someone had written risk assessment. The marker ink was still fresh, glossy. I erased it quickly, my hand shaking, then stood there longer than necessary, staring at the clean surface, as if it might reveal who had written it. When I asked Lena from my team about it later, she frowned. "That's weird," she said. "I didn't see anything." "Are you sure?" I pressed. She hesitated, then smiled. "You're probably just stressed, Alex. New place, new role." Stressed. Another word that closes doors instead of opening them. I stopped sharing ideas entirely. Let others speak first. Let silence protect me. The notebook grew thicker, my handwriting tighter, cramped. I reread old entries and wondered when I'd started sounding like someone I wouldn't trust. The dreams came back. Not about Northline this time, but about rooms with glass walls where people watched me work without speaking. About documents that rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. About applause that followed me down empty hallways. One morning my access badge didn't work. The reader blinked red, then green, then red again. I tried twice more before the security guard waved me through with a joke about technology. I laughed along, too loud. The sound echoed strangely in the lobby. At my desk, an email waited, a meeting request from HR, different company. Same subject line, quick sync. My pulse thudded in my ears. I hovered over the accept button, the cursor blinking patiently. For a moment I considered declining walking out, letting the narrative form without me. Instead, I clicked yes. The room was smaller this time, the table scarred with old scratches, initials carved into the underside. The HR rep Daniel spoke gently, his voice calibrated for reassurance. He asked about my workload, my adjustment, my stress levels. Each question felt like a test I didn't know how to pass. "We've had a concern raised," he said eventually, eyes flicking to his notes. "Nothing formal, just something we want to address proactively." The word concern landed with a familiar weight. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table, nails biting skin. "About what?" I asked. He smiled. "Perception. Perception is a wide door. Anything can walk through it." As he spoke, the room seemed to tilt, just slightly. The hum of the lights grew louder. I thought of my notebook, safe in my bag, and wondered if documentation mattered when perception was the charge. When I left, the hallway felt longer than before. My reflection followed me in the glass, distorted. I caught my own eye and looked away. That night, I opened the notebook and read it from the beginning, from Northline, from Greg, from the Tuesday I'd been fully cleared. The entries formed a story whether I wanted them to or not. A narrative of erosion, of quiet adjustments, of smiles that meant distance. I realized then that the threat didn't need to be a person. It could be a pattern. A lesson passed hand to hand, company to company, teaching people what was rewarded and what was erased. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if I'm paranoid or prescient. The line between them has thinned to translucence. But sometimes, late at night, I imagine applause again, muffled and distant. And I wonder whose name they're saying now, and whether mine is being written somewhere clean and professional, waiting for the right moment to surface.